We are in the midst of a series of messages that have to do with Christian distinctiveness. When I say that, what I mean is that as we go out into the world, there should be some distinction. Something that says, look, they're different. Something that says, look, there's something about them. And that something and that distinction is critical to our mission in the world, for our mission of taking Christ to the world. And this morning's particular focus is love. And that we have a kind of love that makes us distinctive. And Jesus, in chapter 13 of John, he's with his disciples on his last night. And he's telling them the last things that he will tell them before he's crucified. And he says this as he's preparing them for his departure by way of the cross. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So you see, he's telling them that if you love one another, that is to say, if you love the rest of the disciples, if you love your Christian brethren, if you love them like I have loved you, then you will be distinctive in the world. He says this by saying that then they will know. All men will know that you are my disciples. So it is only as we love one another like Jesus loved us that we will be distinctive enough to be known to be Jesus' disciples in the world. How did he love us? It's important for us to know how he has loved us, because it's that kind of love that we have to love with to be able to realize this distinction. I like the description in 1 John in chapter 3, right before the passage where Melissa read from this morning. In verse 16, John says this, by this we know love. So see, he's preparing you. This is it. This is how we know it. This is what we're talking about. That he laid down his life for us. That's precisely how we have to be loving one another. That we are ready and willing and doing it, laying our life down for one another. Now, this precisely requires us to give something of ourselves up. It's much more than a feeling. It's something we do. We sacrifice something of ourselves, whether it be time, whether it be resources, whether it be emotional energy, whatever it might be, we are required to lay something of ourselves down for the sake of our brethren. This is precisely how we must love so that we will be distinctive in the world. The world knows how to love. They have their own way of loving, but this is the Christian way to love, that we would lay our lives down for one another. And by this men will know, all men will know that we are his disciples. And we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? So if we have something, again, whether it be time, whether it be material possessions, whether it be financial means, whether it be emotional support, whatever it might be, if we have what our brother needs and we see the need and we are not willing to go out of our way, if we are not willing to lay our own lives down for their benefit, for their sake, then it's not the kind of love that we're talking about this morning. He says, then, how does God's love abide in him if that is the case? If we fail to do that. Little children, let us not love in word or speech, but in deed and in truth. So it's not something we just say. It's not something we just feel. It's something of our doing. And I would say that for the most part, our feelings are a product of our doing. So that when we begin to love one another like this, when we lay something of ourselves on the line, so to speak, to meet our brother or our sister's need, then that produces feelings for that person and reciprocal feelings as well. So this is how we love. We know how it is. What I want to speak of the most this morning is how to engender the right environment for this to happen. It doesn't happen by accident very often. We need to be intentional. We need to be intentional about engendering the right environment for this to take place. And I want to take you to Hebrews chapter 10. And I have preached this passage. It's been a while back. But in Hebrews chapter 10, beginning in verse 22, the writer of Hebrews gives us 3 commands. They're very distinctive commands, very easy to pick out. And they're like this. I'm going to fly by the first 2 and focus on the third. In verse 22, he says, let us draw near. That's the first command. In verse 23, he says, let us hold fast the confession. That's the second command. And the third command here we find is in verse 24, and it says this, let us consider. Let us consider. This next, the verse 24 and verse 25 is really difficult. It's difficult to get it into the English language and keep the full sense of it. For instance, here's one thing that you'll notice right off. For instance, if you have an NIV translation, perhaps. That's what the Pew Bibles are. And if you look at the NIV translation, you're going to see here in verses 24 and 25, you're going to see 3 distinct commands. You're going to see let us occur 3 times within those 2 verses. But that's not the sense of it. There's really one verb. There's one verb in verse 24 that controls and describes the action of both everything that happens in 24 and 25. And that verb, that action is consider. Let us consider one another. That's what he's talking about. That is the command. Let us consider, my translation says, how to stir up one another to love and good works. And again, this is very difficult to translate. Because what we have here in my translation, stir up, to stir up is an infinitive right there, but it's really a noun in the Greek language. And what this really, if you tried very literally to translate this, it might sound something like this. Also, let us consider one another for the purpose of a provocation of love and good works. So, we consider one another, and in that consideration is precisely for the purpose of provoking love and good works. And that provocation then is reciprocal more than it is one way. We don't consider this so that we can go stir other people up to good works alone, but we take this into consideration, engendering a right environment so that there happens to be in that environment a provocation of love and good works that is reciprocal. Now, it takes the right environment for that to happen. It takes the right circumstances for that provocation of love and good works to happen. Now, when he's talking about love and good works there, I want you to notice there that that's two parts of the same thing, which very closely follows what we just read in 1 John, when he says, not in word and speech alone, but in deed and truth. It's that deed, it's that work, it's that tangible, I can see it, I can experience it kind of a thing. That's the kind of love we're talking about. Love and good works are two parts of the same thing that are the end results of our consideration. And it takes a right environment, I'm telling you, for us to really take this into consideration. It takes the right environment for us to appropriately consider one another. It takes the right environment to provoke among us love and good works. And he tells us what that is. And it's not a separate command, as the NIV would put it. But what follows here then is instructions on how to engender what he has just commanded you to do. Not neglecting to meet together. Not neglecting to meet together. And the meeting together is the environment in which that consideration is provoked. The meeting together needs to be such that it engenders that provocation, because that is the place that we consider and take into consideration one another. When we meet together, that's what he's saying right here, that it's the meeting together that provokes this. And if you fail to meet together, you will fail to take one another into consideration to the extent that love and good works is provoked. Let me say that again. If you fail to meet together, you will fail to take one another into consideration to the extent that this love and good works is provoked. So what we need to do then is make sure we get the meeting right. We need to make sure it's the kind of meeting that provokes this. So I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about the kind of meetings that we have. One of them is the one we're at right now. And you've probably heard a lot of preachers, and maybe I've done this, say, look, it says right here, don't fail to meet together. That means come to church on Sunday morning. Well, it doesn't precisely mean that. It precisely means don't fail to meet together in those environments in which you can take one another into consideration to the extent that it provokes love and good works. That's precisely what he means. Well, it's a mouthful, but that's what he means. And Bill's going to repeat it right now. Go, Bill. All right. So our meeting has to be such that it provokes this. Our meeting on Sunday morning is a meeting. But if we limit the command of this verse, these two verses, to Sunday morning, we are missing it. Because there are some things that happen on Sunday morning that are critically important. It's a time where we come together and we say it again and again that it's a time when we corporately turn our attention fully to God. We reach out to Him. We listen to Him through His Word. We sing praises to Him. We give offerings to Him. But there's something more that has to happen in our meetings. It has to be such that it engenders this consideration of one another to the extent that it provokes love and good works. And really what has to happen in some kind of a meeting then, it has to be some kind of a meeting where we learn what's going on in each other's lives. What's the person next to you? What's going on in their life this week? We hear something of that on Sunday mornings. But what's really going on in their life? What's really going on internally, emotionally? What are the real deepest needs of the person sitting next to you? Does our meeting really provoke love and good works that stem from considering one another to that extent? Does it do that? But we have other meetings In other meetings, I think that we are more inclined to engender this kind of consideration. On this Sunday night, we sit down at tables and we have a meal together every Sunday night. And you talk with each other. You get to know each other. You learn what's going on in their life. We have a Friday night meeting every other Friday night. Same thing. We talk, we visit, we eat, we visit, we discuss Scripture and pray together, we visit some more, and that's the way Friday nights go. It engenders that kind of thing. I'll give you an example. We have some people that come to that meeting that moved recently, and people knew they were moving. So people knew they were moving, so people knew they needed help, and so people helped. It's because they knew what was going on in their life. That's what I'm talking about. Knowing what's going on in each other's lives. Being a part of each other's lives. That's love and good works. That's where it comes from. We provoke it in that environment that engenders that. It happens in other ways here. I'm thinking of another example. Before Ollie Hoffman passed away, for a long time, before she passed away, there was a group of ladies that went out there every week to her house. Every week, the same group of ladies would go out to her house on a particular day of the week and meet with her. They would consider one another. And it was love, and it was something that she needed. That's another way. I'll tell you another way that I know of that happened here. Not too long ago, I can't remember the exact time of it, but last time Marvin Parr came up here. There were several people, or down here I should say, came down to visit. He moved away, came back to visit us because he loves us. And when he was here, he was meeting with people every day. He was busy the whole time he was here because people were taking him out to eat. People were bringing him to his house, to their house to eat. All kinds of things. That's meeting together. That impacted Marvin Parr. I'm going to read something. I get cards from him often, actually. And this is a recent one that shows you that that's still having an impact. This is maybe a week old. I've received several birthday cards from your people at Clemmons. They all meant so much to me. To be thought of when I've been gone so long. As of this time, that is where I want to be, among my final rest, or in my final resting. Never in all of my life have I felt more loved by my neighbors than I have there. I can't bring Nina back, but maybe I can be there near her. That's a note from Marvin Parr. I know that this congregation impacted him deeply. Not because they thought about him. Not because they had some kind of feeling about him. But because they loved him in a way that was tangible. It's because they had those meetings with him. It's because they were part of his life. And I'm telling you, as simple as this, we need to be meeting together in more ways than on Sunday morning. We need to be a part of each other's lives all week long. And maybe we can't be a part of each and every one's lives, but there needs to be groups who are a part of each other's lives. Because it's that environment where this love and good works that I am speaking of stems from. It is from those places that it stems. So we need to take into consideration what I believe the writer means right here when he says, don't neglect. Do not neglect the meeting together. Because it is here, in these kinds of environments, that this love and good works will stem from. It is this kind of love that is the love of God. It is this kind of love that will make us distinctive in a lost world. It is this kind of love that will make us attractive. It is this kind of love that will make Christ attractive to a lost world, to a world that needs this very thing as much as every one of us needs it. Let's pray.